This is Pastor Emery. During the broadcast, you will hear me offer free monthly literature, and I will state the month. Please do not write for that literature packet as such. You may be hearing these tapes months, even years, after the original broadcast was made. If you are interested in the literature, please write and ask for it by title, or write and ask for our current literature list. Thank you. Is the Bible a closed book to you, or do you understand portions of it while the rest remains a mystery? You do want to increase your understanding of the Bible, do you not? In the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a key that will unlock the mysteries of the Bible. Stay tuned. What you heard was part of the beginning narrative of a Bible movie made for showing and distribution by our church and America's Promise Radio. The movie is 42 minutes long. It is professionally done in sound and beautiful color, and in the showings of this movie in churches, in public meetings, and in homes across America during the last few months, many individuals have stated after seeing the movie that they had learned more about the Bible in that 42 minutes than they had learned in years attending a denominational church. The movie does what it announces that it will do, give its viewers a key to understanding the Bible story. This is Pastor Emery, and in just a few minutes I am going to continue reading that narrative of the movie. This will take this broadcast and the next, and I am offering free to my radio audience a printed copy of the text of the movie. It is without all of the beautiful color that is in the movie, of course, but I believe you will be blessed by hearing it over this radio broadcast, then reading it in the booklet, and many of you may then want to obtain a copy of the movie itself to show in your church, to friends, or to a family gathering. The movie is available for a nominal rental charge. It can be obtained from us in 16 millimeter, in Super 8, and also in video cassette for playing over your own home television set if you have a video recorder player. You may write to me at America's Promise, Post Office Box 5334, Phoenix, Arizona, 85010, for the movie booklet titled, the same as the movie, Heirs of the Promise. It will be in this month's free radio packet. Just ask for the September packet or the movie packet, and you will receive the printed narrative, information on how you may obtain the movie itself, and a few related tracts and other items. This is not a movie of someone preaching, such as you might see over a television religious broadcast. It is in the form of a documentary study of just what it was God Almighty told us in His Bible that He would do in and upon the earth to the descendants and the heirs of the promises God made to Abraham. That is the reason for the title, Heirs of the Promise, and the subtitle, Abraham's Children. The title is taken from a New Testament verse which is quite familiar to most churchgoers, Galatians 3 and verse 29, which reads, And if ye be Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise. Millions of our people throughout the nations of Christendom know in a vague way that they have an inheritance which is somehow related to what God promised Abraham. However, if you ask most of them what that promise is, they would either be unable to answer, or you would get a number of different answers. The movie, quoting directly from the covenants to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob Israel, shows in its first 20 minutes just what it is we, as inheritors of those promises, should expect from the God of the Bible. I will be reading the first 20 minutes of that movie narrative during the rest of this broadcast and the balance next week. Here is my address again, where you may write and receive a free printed copy of the movie narrative, and information on how you may borrow a copy of the film for showing in your area. Write to America's Promise, Box 5334, Phoenix, Arizona, 85010. Ask for the movie packet or the free September packet. All right, you heard the introduction to the movie. Then the narration goes into the Bible story, a narrative which is, in effect, an outline of God's work and God's plan for His people upon the earth. Remember, as you hear this, of course, the movie shows pictures which complement, emphasize, and make plainer what the viewer is hearing. Quoting from Heirs of the Promise. The Bible story begins in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In the rest of chapter 1, we are told of the creation of the animals and all living creatures on the earth and under the sea. Chapter 2 is the forming of Adam, placing him in the Garden of Eden, of Eve, their disobedience, and removal from the garden. In a few more pages we read of the flood, the saving of Noah and his household, and the spreading of their descendants across the land. On page 9 of my Bible, we learn of the building of the Tower of Babel, its destruction, God's confounding of the people's language, and their dispersion across the earth. In only 9 pages, God covers many centuries, including awesome and terrifying calamities. Then on page 10, God speaks to one man, a man named Abraham, and from this page on for over 1,000 pages, the Bible is about Abraham and his descendants. On page 10, in Genesis 12, God says to this man, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Then follows a number of meetings between God and Abraham. God later meets with Abraham's son Isaac, and later with Jacob, the son of Isaac, and repeats the promises or covenants made with Abraham. All of these promises and covenants have to do with the future of Jacob's children. The rest of the Bible deals almost exclusively with these heirs of the covenants and the promises called in the Bible the children of Israel. The law, the doctrines, the warnings and admonishments are addressed to Israel. All of the prophets are Israelites. All of the writers of both the Old Testament and the New are Israelites. In Amos 3, God said to Israel, You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Paul said in Romans 9:4 that the promises and the covenants pertain to Israel. He wrote, Who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises. Abraham, though dead 2,000 years by the time of Christ, is mentioned 69 times in the New Testament. When Jesus was born, Zechariah said in Luke 1 that Jesus had come to remember God's covenant and the oath which God had sworn to Father Abraham. In Acts 3:13, Peter said the father of Jesus was, quote, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, the God of our fathers, end of quote. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, began his sermon in Acts 7, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham, and then he preached of God and Israel. Paul wrote in Romans 15:4, Whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. So let us consider just that today, that the Bible is the book of God and of Abraham's children, of one man's family, if you please, and that the things written of them aforetime were written for our learning. And let us turn to the covenants that God made with Abraham, and with Isaac, and with Jacob, and with the children of Israel. God appeared again to Abraham in Genesis 15, in verse 5, And he brought him forth abroad, and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. This promise of great numbers of descendants is repeated several times. In Genesis 17, beginning in verse 3, we read, And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and thy seed after thee. In Genesis 17, God spoke of Abraham's wife, Sarah. Verse 15, And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Now Abraham already had a son, Ishmael, by Sarai's Egyptian handmaid Hagar. But this great covenant was not to be made with Ishmael, but with Isaac. God goes on to Abraham, But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. Isaac, the son of promise, was born according to God's word. Isaac later married Rebekah, and she was also given a blessing in Genesis 24 and verse 16. And they blessed Rebekah and said unto her, Thou art our sister, be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those which hate them. To Isaac and Rebekah were born twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau, although the firstborn, sold his birthright to Jacob, who then became the rightful inheritor of these Abrahamic covenants. God appeared to Jacob to confirm these covenants in Genesis 28, including verse 14. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. These and other verses make it plain that all the covenants pertaining to Abraham's blessings were passed to Jacob, whose name later was changed to Israel. In Genesis 35, God appeared again unto Jacob. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. We see this same thing repeated over and over again, that these descendants of the patriarchs of Israel would be a great number of people and would become a multitude of nations. For those who have just tuned in, this is Pastor Emery, and I am reading from the narrative of a 42-minute sound and color movie we have made for our church and America's Promise about the covenants of the Bible. You may write me for a printed copy of the text, and we'll also send you information on how you may see the movie itself. Going on in the narrative of Heirs of the Promise. While Jacob was yet alive, Joseph was sold into bondage in Egypt. A few years later, the other 11 sons and their families moved to Egypt, where Joseph saved them from the famine. While still in Egypt, Jacob Israel adopted the 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, his grandsons, as his firstborn in place of Reuben and Simeon. This adoption as Israel's firstborn is verified in 1 Chronicles 5, verses 1 and 2. In verse 16 of Genesis 48, Israel said of these 2 sons of Joseph, Let my name be named on them, and the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. In verse 19 of Genesis 48, Jacob prophesied that Ephraim would become greater than Manasseh, and that his seed would become a fullness of nations. After Joseph's death, Israel continued to multiply in Egypt, but a new king rose up over Egypt, who put the children of Israel into cruel bondage. He attempted to reduce the number of Israelites by ordering all of the male Israelite babies killed. Moses was saved by his mother, raised in Pharaoh's household, but eventually was driven from Egypt. We read in Exodus 2 and verse 23 that during Moses' absence that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God then sent Moses and brought the now 2 million or more Israelites out of Egypt with great signs and wonders, and brought them to Mount Sinai in the wilderness. There God made a covenant with these several million descendants of Abraham, saying to them in Exodus 19, verses 5 through 8, Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord hath spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. God had said to Abraham, I will be a God to you and to your seed after you. That covenant was formalized with Abraham's seed in what we recognize as a marriage ceremony, with the bridegroom saying, Will you obey? And the bride answering, I will. Israel became God's wife. That the wife-husband relationship is correct is verified in several passages, including Isaiah 54 and verse 5. For thy Maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth shall he be called. God then gave Israel the 10 Commandments in stone, and several hundred other statutes and judgments, usually called God's law. While Israel was in the wilderness, learning the statutes and the judgments, God gave further promise of future greatness. In Deuteronomy 33, he gave a separate blessing to each of the tribes, with the greater blessing recorded for Joseph in verses 13 through 17. And of Joseph he said, Blessed of the Lord be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew and for the deep that coucheth beneath, and for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon, and for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth, and fullness thereof, and for the good will of him that dwelt in the bush, let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. This blessing can only mean that the descendants of Joseph were to have a land blessed with great agricultural harvests, wealth from the seas, and ores and minerals from the earth. The greatest portion of the Israel blessings would be fulfilled in the 2 sons of Joseph, who had been made the inheritors of the Abrahamic covenants, as we have read in Genesis 48. After 40 years in the wilderness, Moses died, and Joshua brought Israel into Canaan land and established them there as a nation. David then came to the throne in Israel in approximately 1050 B.C., and in 40 years of war enlarged and secured Israel as one nation in Canaan land, ruling them from Zion and Jerusalem. At one point, according to 1 Chronicles 21, David had over 1,500,000 men under arms, which would indicate that God's promise of increasing the seed of Abraham was being fulfilled, with 10 to perhaps 15 million people living in Palestine at that time. When David died, his son Solomon ruled for another 40 years, establishing an era of peace and prosperity and building the great temple to Jehovah. The Israel kingdom was so blessed it became the marvel of that part of the world. It seemed as if God's promises and prophecies of great increase in material blessings were being fulfilled. But After Solomon's death came a terrible blow. The nation was divided. The 10 northern tribes established their capital in Samaria. Jerusalem now ruled only the southern half of Israel, and the rivalry between the two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, brought wars, corruption, and sin, even worship of Baal and the other gods of the wicked Canaanites who still lived among them. God sent prophets to them, warning them he would send alien nations against them who would take them captive into other lands. God called Israel's sin of worshiping Canaanite gods adultery, and told her through Jeremiah and Hosea that he was divorcing her. Jeremiah 3 and verse 8 reads, "And I saw when for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a bill of divorce." God said to the northern kingdom of Israel in verse 2 of the 2nd chapter of Hosea, "Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband." The northern house of Israel therefore was divorced, and no longer the wife of Jehovah. God sent Assyria to conquer the northern Israel kingdom. The wars and deportations are recorded in 2 Kings, chapter 16, 17, and 18. Here are a few pertinent verses. Verse 6, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor, by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes." Verse 18, "Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only." This was bad enough, but the Israelites in the Judah kingdom were also following the corrupted ways of the Edomites and Canaanites. So 7 years later we read in 2 Kings 18, verse 13, "Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah, and took them." This would have left only a very small remnant of Israelites in the fortified city of Jerusalem by 700 B.C. According to both the Bible and ancient historic accounts, these pagan empires used forcible evacuation as a means of preventing rebellion at a later date. They moved non-Israelites into the vacated land of the northern kingdom, according to 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 24. "And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria, and dwelt in the cities thereof." So the 2 conquests of Assyria would have removed the vast majority of the Israelites into Assyria and out of the land of Palestine. The number removed could have been in the millions. The prophet Jeremiah continued to prophesy to the tiny remnant in Jerusalem, and in the 7th chapter of Jeremiah, he told these Judahites that because of their sin, God would now abandon Jerusalem. In Kings and Chronicles, we have another 100 years of the history of the Judah kingdom at Jerusalem, a history of continuance of sin, some revivals, but always turning away from the God of Israel. During that time, Assyria's power declined, and she lost control over much of her empire, and Babylon grew. But God sent Jeremiah to tell Judah that Babylon would conquer them. They planned to resist, but Jeremiah told them in Jeremiah 37, verses 8 through 10, "And the Chaldeans shall come again and fight against this city, and take it, and burn it with fire. Thus saith the Lord, Deceive not yourselves, saying, The Chaldeans shall surely depart from us, for they shall not depart. For though ye had smitten the whole army of the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, that fight against you, and there remain but wounded men among them, yet should they rise up, every man in his tent, and burn this city with fire. And it came to pass, Jerusalem was destroyed in about 595 B.C., and the Judahites were taken into Babylon for the 70-year captivity prophesied by Jeremiah. All seems lost. What has happened to the covenants? What has become of the great promises of God? And that is all the time I have today. That is about one half of the narrative of the movie Heirs of the Promise. 2,500 years ago, God's promises to Abraham seem to have failed. The last half of the movie demonstrates they have not, for we see their fulfillment in Europe, America, and Canada among our race and nation. God willing, I'll read the rest of the movie text next week. Meanwhile, you may have a printed copy of the entire narrative of Heirs of the Promise by writing to me and asking for the free movie packet or the free September packet. We'll include information on how you may see the movie itself. The announcer will give my address in just a moment. Until next week when I return, God willing, this is Pastor Emery saying goodbye. God bless you, read your Bibles, and pray for Christian America. This is Pastor Emery. God Almighty promised Father Abraham that his descendants, called Israelites, would be a great number of people, that they would be many nations, that they would be blessed above all other people, and that God would be their God and they would be His people. Is it possible that modern ministers who are looking for the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promises in the Jewish people are looking at the wrong people? Stay tuned. Thomas Paine, one of the best-known writers of the American War for Independence, has often been presented to us as an atheist, or at least as one who did not believe the Holy Bible. The charge is only partly true. Thomas Paine did say he thought the Bible to be mostly a book of fables and falsehoods, but the reason he gave for saying that is very enlightening. Thomas Paine had been taught, as have many people today, that the people who call themselves Jews are the Israel people of the Bible. And Thomas Paine said that since he saw no fulfillment of God's promises and prophecies to Israel coming to pass in the Jewish people, he could only conclude that the Bible was mostly fable. Here is a quote from the narrative of our movie, Heirs of the Promise, something which Thomas Paine, as a student of the Bible, would have known. Quote, "The law, the doctrines, the warnings and admonishments are addressed to Israel. All of the prophets are Israelites. All of the writers of both the Old Testament and the New are Israelites. In Amos 3, God said to Israel, 'You only have I known of all the families of the earth.'" Paul wrote of these Israelites in Romans 9:4, quote, "To whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises." End of quote from the movie text. Thomas Paine knew that was in the Bible, and yet he saw none of these things being fulfilled in the Jewish people. And the same is true today. Many people of good intelligence, like Thomas Paine, question the Bible because none of these promises to Israel seem to have been kept by God Almighty. They look to the Jews, and they see no many nations. They see no increase in numbers. In fact, from the Bible itself, we can estimate that there were more Israelites living in David's kingdom 3,000 years ago than there are Jews in all the world today. As to God blessing them, if you believe the Jews are Israelites, and if you believe that all who do not confess Jesus Christ as their Savior go to a burning hell when they die and are there tortured for eternity, why then you must believe that almost all Israelites who have died since Christ are now screaming in the flames of hell. Not much of a fulfillment of a promise of blessing, is it? So let us return to our narrative of the movie, Heirs of the Promise, for in it is correctly identified the race of Israel. And we will see that God Almighty has not forgotten His people. He has kept His covenants to Abraham. Before I begin that, I want to give my address where you can write for a full printed copy of the movie text complete with all of the Bible passages you have heard on these broadcasts and which are in the movie. Write to me at America's Promise, Box 5334, Phoenix, Arizona 85010. Ask for the movie packet or the September packet. It is free and postpaid. You'll receive the printed text plus some related literature, and we'll also send information on how you may arrange to see the movie itself. My address again is America's Promise, Box 5334, Phoenix, Arizona 85010. Last week I had read in the narrative up to the division of the kingdom after David and Solomon, the carrying off of most of the Israelites to Assyria 7 centuries before Christ, as recorded in 2 Kings 16, 17, and 18, then the 70-year Babylonian captivity of the remnant of Judah, and the return of less than 50,000 Israelites to Jerusalem a little over 400 years before Christ, as recorded in Ezra and Nehemiah. As the movie states, the number of Israelites carried captive out of ancient Palestine would have been in the millions, yet the Bible records that less than 50,000 were returned. These 50,000, of course, would have been the ancestors of the small Israelite community that existed in Palestine when Jesus was born. Mary and Joseph and the disciples came from that remnant. Now, let us resume the movie text here. Quote, "But what happened to the other tens of millions of Israelites who never returned to Jerusalem? Are their descendants lost from the covenant promises of God?" We must now ask the same question Paul asked 500 years later in Romans 11, "Hath God cast away his people?" Paul answers, "God forbid, for I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people, which he foreknew." So the question boils down to this: what did happen to the millions, yes, millions of Israelites who were driven out of Palestine 700 years before Christ, and where were they, if they existed at all, at the time Paul uttered his statement of confidence in God keeping his promises to Israel? Can we find out what happened to them so that their descendants can be identified in the world today? For an answer to that question, we are going to call upon E. Raymond Kapp, a Bible student and biblical archaeologist from California. Mr. Kapp has traveled and studied extensively in Europe and the Mideast. He lectures on the Dead Sea Scrolls, on the pyramids of Egypt, and on other Bible archaeological subjects. And at this point in the movie, we then show an interview with E. Raymond Kapp at his home in Camarillo, California. Here is my question to him. As a minister, I know there is an abundance of prophecy concerning the destiny of Israel, but there is no Bible history of this portion of Israel referred to in 2 Kings 17:6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So Bible history of this major part of Israel ends here, and yet the prophets and the New Testament promise an increase in numbers, great blessings, and an eventual restoration. With the passing of 2,500 years since this Assyrian captivity, one might think that all hope of tracing these Israelites is lost. Ray, can archaeology answer this question? Mr. Kapp begins his answer, "Yes, Pastor Emery, it has." Mr. Kapp then describes in the movie, in some detail, the tablets recently found by archaeologists in ancient Assyria. Mr. Kapp points out that these records of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, do not call the Israelites by the name of Israel, but instead call them Gomorrah, which was the Assyrian name for Samaria, the capital city of the conquered Israel nation. Mr. Cap then goes on, quote, "We find in another and later Assyrian tablet that in the second year of the reign of this same king, which would be about 679 B.C., the Gemira, under a leader named Tespah, sought freedom by moving north, but the Assyrian army pursued and defeated them in the upper Euphrates district. Nevertheless, they reported a large number of these Israelites escaped to the shores of the Black Sea. The Greeks also record the same activity, including an invasion of Sardis, the capital of Lydia, in 645 B.C. In the Greek records, they refer to the Gemira as Chimeroi, which we translate into English as Cimmerian. About 600 B.C., the Lydians drove the Gemira, or Cimmerians, out of Asia Minor, where they settled in the Carpathian regions west of the Black Sea. We now also know what happened to the larger body of Gemira, or Israelites, who did not escape the Assyrians. They formed an alliance with Esarhaddon the king when he came under attack of the Medes and the Persians. This treaty allowed the Israelites to establish colonies in Sakacene in the north and Bactria in the east near the Caspian Sea. Assyria fell in 612 B.C. Soon the Israelites themselves came under attack by the Medes. Now those that had settled in Sakacene moved north through the Darial Pass of the Caucasus into the steppe region of South Russia. There they became known by the Greek name Scythians. The Israelites that had settled in Bactria were forced north and east, and in the records of the Persians they are called Massagetae and Sekka. Archaeology has solved two of the greatest archaeological problems. First, what happened to the hundreds of thousands of Israelites who disappeared south of the Caucasus? And second, what was the origin of the Cimmerians and the mysterious tribes known as Scythians who suddenly appeared north of the Caucasus, both at the same time in history? They were one and the same people. They were Israelites. Now may I point out what the Bible has to say concerning Israel. Amos 9, verse 9. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Our history books pick up the story at this point, recording the westward migrations of the Scythians as they came into collision with the Cimmerians, who had earlier settled west of the Black Sea. Their kinship lost over the centuries, the ensuing battles forced the Cimmerians west and north, where they were known as the Celts, Gauls, and Cimbri. By the end of the 4th century B.C., the Scythians had established themselves in the great and prosperous kingdom of Scythia. Later, Sarmatians, and these were a mixed, non-Israelitish people of Iranian origin, in turn drove the Scythians northwest to the shores of the Baltic Sea. At this time in history, we find the Romans introduced the name Germans in place of the name Scythians in order not to confuse the Scythians with the Sarmatians who now occupied Scythia. Germanus, being the Latin name for genuine, indicates the Germans were the genuine Scythians or Israelites. During this time, the Celts were expanding in all directions from Central Europe. Some of the Celts invaded Italy and sacked Rome in 390 B.C. Another group moved back into Asia Minor in 280 B.C., and the Greeks called them Galatians, as they did another group of Celts that had settled in Gaul or modern France. This also indicates that Paul's letters to the Galatians were written to his kinsmen Israelites, or at least descendants of the earlier Galatians. Some of the Celts moved into Spain and became known as Iberus, the Gaelic name for Hebrews. Others poured into Britain to form the bedrock of the British race. Later, the Iberus moved into Ireland as Scots and later into northern Britain to establish the nation of Scotland. Your history books also record the Germanic tribes breaking up into many divisions, the Angles, the Saxons, Jutes, Danes, and Vikings, to name just a few. Other Germanic tribes later poured into the lands vacated by the Celts and established the Gothic nations of the Vandals, Lombards, Franks, Burgundians, and others. The so-called lost tribes of Israel really were never lost. They only lost their identity as they migrated westward over the centuries from the land of their captivity. End of quote from E. Raymond Capp, archaeologist, in describing the Israelites leaving Assyria. At that point in the movie, the narrative continues. And there you have it, my friends. Mr. Capp has given us an answer to our question, what happened to the millions of Israelites who were dispersed out of old Canaan land 7 centuries before Christ and who never returned? The answer, they migrated onto the continent of Europe and were the ancestors of the white European race. And in answering our one question about Israel's disappearance, Mr. Capp has given us the key to several other mysteries of world history. Mr. Capp has revealed to us why it was these people of Europe who became the great nations, and who were blessed by God above all other nations, not only with fertile land and abundance from the seas, but with arts, science, literature, inventions, and discovery. God bestowed upon that one race almost every invention and discovery that has improved man's condition and lot upon the earth. Certainly, God made these offspring of Abraham a blessing to all the families of the earth. Mr. Capp has answered another question which is often asked of ministers and seldom answered. Why, of all the people of the earth, has it been only this white Caucasian race, these so-called Gentiles, who have claimed Jesus Christ as their God and who have taken the Bible as the foundation of their religion? The answer, the truth which is avoided and even denied by the clergy, is simple. These people are the Israelites, the children of Abraham, God's chosen people. And that explains why every true gospel preacher and missionary for Jesus Christ for over 1900 years has been of this one race. They are dispersed Israel, fulfilling Bible prophecy even while blindness in part is upon them, blindness of their own identity as the chosen Israel of God. Biblical promises have become historical facts. In the Old Testament, God had promised to regather divorced Israel unto himself. Ezekiel 34, verses 6 and 11, My sheep wandered through all the mountains and upon every high hill. Yea, my flock was scattered upon all the face of the earth, and none did search or seek after them. For thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I, even I, will both search my sheep and seek them out. Jesus Christ made it plain he was the instrument of Israel's return to God. Luke 19:10 he said, For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. In Matthew 15:24, Jesus answered and said, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In Matthew 10 and verse 6, Jesus instructed his disciples to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In Luke 1, Zacharias the priest, who was John the Baptist's father, said that Jesus came to redeem his people and to perform the mercy promised to our fathers, and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he sware to our father Abraham. Paul, an Israelite, wrote to Israelites in the dispersion in Galatia, in Galatians 4 and verse 4 and 5, When the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law. Only the Israelites were under God's law. In Romans 15 and verse 8 we read, Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. These promises, as we have seen, were of great national development, a great increase in numbers, blessings of the earth and of the sea, that God would be their God, and they would be his people. After the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, his disciples carried that good news to dispersed Israel in Europe, beginning what we know as the Christian era. For 1,500 more years, Israel remained in Europe, continuing to grow in numbers as God had promised their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then God began to give them inventions, one of which was the printing press, which made the Bible available to all of the people, bringing with it the age of enlightenment, the Reformation, and the age of discovery. A new continent to the west, a new world, was discovered by Columbus and other explorers. Persecution of Christians in Europe began a migration to the New World that began as a trickle and later became a flood. 2,500 years before, while Israel was still in Palestine, God had told King David in 2 Samuel 7:10, "I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more." The prophet Isaiah and others who had written of Israel's regathering made it plain Israel would be regathered into a new land as Christian believers. In Isaiah 11:12 we read, "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Verse 1 through 10 identify that ensign as Jesus Christ, and verse 14 indicates their regathering would be toward the west. Psalm 72 and Zechariah 9 describe that land of Israel's regathering as a land between two seas, and one that would run to the ends of the earth. In Hosea 2:14, God prophesied to cast off Israel, "Behold, I will allure her, and bring her into the wilderness, and speak comfortably unto her." Our Pilgrim Fathers, who were Christian Israelites from Europe, and who knew God's promises, called this North American continent the wilderness and New Canaan land. They said they had come hither to establish the kingdom of God. God turned Israel from Antichrist in Europe, and God brought them one of a city, and two of a family, and He brought them to Zion. As He said in Jeremiah 3:14 and 15, "I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding." In America's early histories they called themselves, this wandering race of Jacobites, a vine out of Egypt, and the seed of Abraham. They named their children with Israel names, and God blessed them above their fathers in Europe. America is that land, New Israel. America is the nation born in a day, on July 4th, 1776, exactly the prophesied 2,520 years after Israel had gone into the Assyrian captivity. In America, God fulfilled Isaiah 60 and verse 22, "A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in His time." It is here that is fulfilled Deuteronomy 33 and verse 13, the promise to Joseph, "Blessed of the Lord be his land." It is in America that Isaiah 35 is fulfilled. "The wilderness and the solitary place was glad for them, and the desert rejoiced and blossomed as the rose." It is in this North American wilderness that waters have broken out and streams in the desert. America is Hephzibah and Beulah land. America truly is God's country. The heathen look at America and say, "Certainly, they are the seed which the Lord hath blessed." Isaiah 49 and verse 6. America is the nation from which the light of God's Word has gone to the ends of the earth. You who are descendants of the people we have traced in the Bible and in history are Israelites, heirs according to the promise, and the Bible is about you and your race. Do not take what you have heard lightly. True to His promise to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel has redeemed us with His own blood. He has kept His word to our fathers. He will most certainly keep His promise with us, their children, of the kingdom of Jesus Christ upon the earth. I believe the time has come when God is casting down all lies, exposing the false prophets, and revealing the truth to His Israel people. The key to understanding the Bible is the truth that we are Israelites, redeemed by Jesus Christ, heirs of the promise, Abraham's children. This is Pastor Emery. In the last two broadcasts, you have heard most of the narrative of our 42-minute sound and color movie. The movie demonstrates the truth that we Anglo-Saxon and kindred peoples of Europe are the true descendants of Israel, and that North America is the land of Israel's regathering. If you will write to me today, I will send you a free printed copy of the entire movie text and information on how you may see the movie itself, perhaps even show it in your own church. The announcer will give my address in just a moment. Write and ask for the movie packet. Today, the great Israel nation of America is surrounded and invaded by the red communist antichrist forces of Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, as God gathers the nations of the earth for the battle of Armageddon. The wicked of the earth, who are the enemies of Jesus Christ, have grown strong and arrogant in this Israel land. They have infiltrated our schools, the news media, even churches and government, in their attempt to keep you in ignorance of your identity as Israelites. They are attempting to steal your heritage, that they may conquer America and take rule over the whole earth. But God Almighty has decreed the destruction of those who hate Jesus Christ and His true Israel people. In the last battle they shall be defeated, we shall be delivered, and the earth will be prepared for the return of Jesus Christ and the great kingdom age. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. Stay tuned for my address. Until next week when I return, God willing, this is Pastor Emery saying goodbye. God bless you. Read your Bibles and pray for America, Israel. This is Pastor Emery. Almost everyone who reads the Holy Bible will agree that it was written by, to, and about Israelites. Isn't it surprising, then, to realize that the race which reads, prints, and distributes the Holy Bible, and claims it as its divinely inspired religious book, is not the Jews, whom most ministers insist are the Israelites, but is instead the members of the white race of Europe? Is it possible the Jews aren't Israelites after all, but that instead you folks whose ancestors come from Europe are the true descendants of the Israelites? What a different picture that would make of the Bible, of current history, and of prophecy. Stay tuned. In the letter to the Romans, Paul refers to his kinsmen according to the flesh in verse 3 of chapter 9, and then he says in verse 4, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises. That verse seems to be a rather complete statement that the entire message of the Bible is directed to the Israelites. Let's take each phrase and analyze it briefly. To whom pertaineth the adoption? This refers to the process by which men become the true sons of God. Now, men of different races and nations today are claiming they have been born again, and that in being born again they are the spiritual sons of God. But if you will read all of the references in the New Testament to this process of men becoming the sons of God, you will find they all refer in some way to Israelites and to no other people. Turn to Galatians 4, where verse 5 says, in part, that we might receive the adoption of sons. However, to understand who the we are in that phrase, we must remember that the writer, Paul, was an Israelite. So let's read both verse 4 and 5 written by this Israelite. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we, meaning we who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Only Israelites, of all the world's people, were ever under God's law. In fact, only Israelites are promised redemption in the Bible. In Ephesians, we again come across the phrase, the adoption, in verse 5 of the first chapter. Let's read part of the passage, Ephesians 1, beginning in verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who hath blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ, according as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestinated us unto the adoption of children by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. Again, Paul uses the collective term us, obviously meaning us Israelites. And if you read the entire chapter, it is also obvious that it is Israelites who were predestinated, in other words, destined beforehand to be the children or sons of God. This, and scores of prophecies in the Old Testament, testify that it was Israelites who would be the followers of God in the last age. And yet for the last 1900 years, of the many millions who have claimed sonship to Jesus Christ, the God of the Bible, 99% of them have been of the white race of Europe, whom modern ministers claim are not Israelites. Is the Bible in error? Did God make a mistake? Or are the ministers in error in not knowing these Europeans are descendants of ancient Israel? Turn back to Romans 9. We read verse 4 where the phrase, to whom pertaineth the adoption, is. Let's consider the second phrase in verse 4. And the glory, meaning that something called the glory also pertains to Israel. The words glory, glorify, glorified, and glorious are used several hundred times in the Bible, so we can't read them all. However, scores of them make it plain that it is in Israel that God will be glorified. Here are a few. Isaiah 44, verse 23. Sing, O ye heavens, for the Lord hath done it. Shout, ye lower parts of the earth. Break forth into singing, ye mountains, O forest and every tree therein, for the Lord hath redeemed Jacob, and glorified himself in Israel. Isaiah 46, verse 13. I will place salvation in Zion, for Israel my glory. There, Israel is called directly the glory of God. In Isaiah 48, God is rebuking Israel for her wickedness. Then he says this in verse 9, For my name's sake will I defer mine anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee not off. Israel had sinned enough to deserve total destruction, but God is saying that for his own, or for God's sake, he will not destroy Israel. He goes on, verse 10 and 11, Behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction. For mine own sake, even for mine own sake will I do it. For how should my name be polluted? And I will not give my glory unto another. God says, in effect, Israel, I could destroy you for your sin, but I will not do so, because I have chosen to give my glory to you, and for my own name's sake, for my reputation, as it were, I will not go back on my word, and I will not transfer my glory to another people. That promise that God would not forsake Israel for another people is why Paul would write 7 centuries later in Romans 11, Hath God cast away his people? God forbid. For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people, which he foreknew. Paul knew, as we should, that whatever promises and covenants God had made with the Israelites would be kept, and whatever prophecies were made about them would most certainly come to pass. One of these prophecies was that God would not give His glory to any other people but Israel. Here are a few more about that glory. Isaiah 49, verse 3. Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. In verse 6 of that same chapter, God says that Israel would be, quote, my salvation unto the end of the earth. Israel would be the carriers of the good news of Jesus Christ, the salvation of the world to the ends of the earth. In what race and in what people has that been fulfilled? Most ministers will admit that it is this white Anglo-Saxon race which has done this, but they call them Gentiles and insist they are non-Israelites. I say no. That prophecy has been and is being fulfilled in Israelites, Anglo-Saxon Israel, the true race of Israel. In Isaiah 59 and verse 20 we read, And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. Then listen to what he says of Israel. Verse 21, As for me, this is my covenant with them, saith the Lord, that my Spirit is upon thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, saith the Lord, from henceforth and forever. God is saying that Israelites would have God's word then and forever. If we believed God, we would be able to find Israel in the world today by simply looking for the people who have His word. And who are they? Any fool can find them. They stick out like a sore thumb among the nations. They are the white, Anglo-Saxon, and kindred peoples of Europe, North America, South Africa, and Australia. They alone, of all the races of the earth, print, distribute, preach, profess, claim and hold on to the Bible, the Word of God. You can travel from America to Europe, to the subcontinent of Asia, to the jungles of Africa, and to the isles of the sea. And wherever you come across any group of this race, and I am not including the Jews, wherever you find this race, you will find, if they practice any religion at all, or profess to believe in any God, it will always and forever be the religion of the Israelite Bible and the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ. Is that all coincidence, that we seem to be a people of one religion, the true religion of the Bible Israelites, or is it another of the hundreds of proofs that we must really be the Israel people? God goes right on to Israel. Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people, but the Lord shall arise upon thee, and His glory shall be seen upon thee. When all of the world would lie in the darkness of false religion and idol worship, where would God's glory be seen? Well, upon Israel, in spite of our own sin and ignorance, in spite of blindness in part of our own identity as Israel. The whole heathen world can see the light of God's glory only upon our nation and the other nations occupied by the white European race, the race of Israel. We already read Isaiah 46 and verse 13, where God called Israel, my glory. Let's turn back to the New Testament. Romans 8, verse 28, the first part of this is often quoted to justify some strange event which has eventually turned out for the good of Christians. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, and they usually stop there. However, the rest of that verse and the following verses identify the people for whom all things work together for good. To them who are the called according to his purpose. So someone here is being identified as, quote, the called. Who are they? Read right on. We'll find they are Israelites. Verse 29. For whom he did foreknow. Now who did God foreknow? We've already seen it is Israelites. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. So here is answered the question, what people in this age were to become the Christians, the sons of God, for whom all things would work out according to their good? Well, the people God foreknew, the Israelites. He goes on, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Here it is plain that those who would become Christians would be brethren, and probably brethren of the ancestry of Jesus Christ. In other words, the people of Israel, which we are. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. The people who would be called to Christ would be those who were predestined to become the sons of God. We've seen from Ephesians that was the Israelites. And from Romans 9:4, we've already seen it was Israelites to whom pertaineth the adoption, or the adoption as sons, or the act of becoming Christians. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called, and whom he called, them he also justified, and whom he justified, them he also glorified. So here we've come around to that word again, glory or glorified, and always and forever it is used in relation only to God and to the Israelites. In verse 33 of Romans 8, these called ones are called God's elect. In Isaiah 45, in verse 4, God calls the descendants of Jacob, Israel, mine elect. Turn to Ephesians chapter 3. Verse 20 is also a very familiar verse to Christians. Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. This is a certain reference to God Almighty, of course. And then follows the conclusion of that sentence, verse 21, unto him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. Where would the glory of God be manifested in all ages? Here it says, in the church. And we've been reading, it would be in Israel. Let's see if we can reconcile those two words. The word church here comes from the Greek word ecclesia, or ecclesia as some pronounce it. It means literally the called ones. That is exactly the term used for Israel in the Old Testament. In Isaiah 48, immediately following God's statement that he would give his glory only to Israel and would not give it to another, we read this. Isaiah 48, verse 12. Hearken unto me, O Jacob, and Israel, my called. The disciples and writers of the New Testament knew that Israelites were the called ones, so it was just natural they would call these Israelite Christians ecclesia, or the called ones. Today we use the English word church for an assembly of called ones, not knowing it is the exact equivalent of the Greek and Hebrew words by which the Bible designates Israel. Turn to Acts 7. Here Stephen, the first Christian martyr, is preaching the sermon which so angered the Jews that they stoned him to death. In speaking of Israel after they left Egypt, he calls that whole body of the Israel people the ecclesia in the wilderness. It is translated here, the church in the wilderness. So Israel was the church of God at Sinai, just as Israelites made up the New Testament church after Jesus, and Israelites constitute 99% of the professing church of God today. Ministers who refer today to the body of believers as, quote, the Gentile church, will tell their listeners they call it that because most Christians today are not Israelites. Nothing could be further from the truth. No non-Israelitish church was ever prophesied in the Bible, nor has any such church come to pass. The church of today is exactly what it was prophesied to be, an Israelite church. Another English word for church is congregation. In the Old Testament, Israel is called the congregation over 250 times, many times the phrase being the congregation of the Lord. Any investigation of Bible terms will prove that all of the words used in both the Old and the New Testament, which mean church or called ones, or which relate to the church, pertain to Israelites. All right, the next phrase in Romans 9 and verse 4 says, and the covenants, by which Paul meant that the covenants of the Bible also pertain to Israel. This is not arguable, and is easily understood by any person with a speaking acquaintance with our Bible. America's Promise radio broadcast has made a movie dealing with these covenants of the Bible. The title of it is Heirs of the Promise, Abraham's Children. It is about 45 minutes long in sound and color, and is a documentary Bible study of just what God Almighty promised and covenanted to Abraham, to Isaac, then to Jacob, and to the Israel people. Our movie examines the Bible history of Israel, then the breakup of the Israel kingdom after David and Solomon, the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities, and the dispersion of the Israel people out of old Palestine several hundred years before Christ. Using archaeology, history, and Bible prophecy, the movie demonstrates to the audience the truth that vast numbers of Israelites migrated onto the continent of Europe in the centuries before Christ. Because they had broken their covenant made with God at Mount Sinai, they lost the name of Israel, which means ruling with God, and are recorded in history by the names given to them by Persian, Greek, and Roman historians. We know them as Saka, Danans, Massagetae, Cimmerians, Kimri, Celts, Scythians, Goths, Vandals, Germans, Saxons, and a dozen other names of European history. Those of us who have studied the disappearance of Israel at the same time and the same place where this Caucasian race suddenly appeared now know these people were Israelites. That is what the movie shows, that although the conditional covenants of Mount Sinai were broken by Israel, the unconditional covenants God made with Abraham can never be broken. And it is because of those covenants that God has fulfilled in our people those promises of great increase in numbers, great blessings, and that He would be our God and we would be His people. I spend many hours every year on this radio trying to get some of the proof that we are Israel across to my listeners. Our movie, Heirs of the Promise, convinces most of its viewers of that truth in less than 45 minutes. So I am going to give you my address now, where you can write to me for a free movie packet. It will include a printed text of the entire movie narrative, plus some of the migration maps, and it will include information on how you can arrange to see the movie itself. Write to me at America's Promise, Box 5334, Phoenix, Arizona, 85010. All of that information and a few other tracts are free for the asking. Just write to that address and ask for the free movie packet. you will see, as Paul did, that the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the service of God, and the promises all pertain to our people Israel. And you will see also that, as verse 5 of Romans 9 says, it was to Israel that Jesus Christ came. Jesus Christ is the God of Israel. Where you find Jesus Christ worshiped, you will find Israel. And once you begin to understand that, then the current gathering of all nations of the world under the red banner of Antichrist communism against America and against the other white nations suddenly comes into focus. Why are the Antichrists making war against the white race? Well, they know we are Israel, and they know they must destroy our race in order to destroy God's work upon the earth. The truth that we are Israel is the key to understanding the Bible, current world events, and what we can expect to happen in the future. So you write today, remember to ask for the free movie packet, which will tell you how you can see our movie, Heirs of the Promise. Along with that, I will send you a list of over 40 books and tracts on this subject of our identity as Israel. And for those among my audience who would like an immediate, in-depth study of our claim that we are Israelites, we have a book titled Tracing Our Ancestors that I will send to you for an offering of $5 or more to America's Promise. It is a startling book to read, as it puts together Bible history, archaeology, Bible prophecy, and world history to prove that we are the Israel people. We have distributed hundreds of copies of this book. As of this date, I know of no person of our race who has read it who has not then admitted, we are Israel, we are God's chosen people. For that book, Tracing Our Ancestors, send an offering of $5 or more and ask for it by title. The movie packet is free, of course. The book, Tracing Our Ancestors,